Welcome to the 5th year of Build. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar, and I've got some exciting episodes coming up for you. We'll continue to debunk a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech, via some insightful interviews with innovators in tech who are both inside and outside Silicon Valley, as well as some solo shows with me. I'm also happy to announce some amazing patrons who are supporting the show. If you'd like to join them and show your support for Build, visit patreon.com/build to learn about the amazing perks we have to offer in exchange for your patronage. Enjoy the upcoming episodes of Build. Ciao for now. One of the biggest myths around building a company in tech is that you need to constantly be growing in terms of customers, employees, and revenue. If you aren't, then you're stagnating and clearly not innovating. As it turns out, continual growth isn't always desirable. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about why. So stay tuned. Welcome to Build, the show that debunks a number of myths and misconceptions related to building products, companies, and your career in tech. I'm your host, Purnima Vijay Shankar. You've probably been bombarded with media and messages around growth and scaling. If you're not growing and scaling, you're probably not innovating. But it's a big myth because in order to innovate, you actually don't need to grow, and continual growth isn't always desirable. In today's Build episode, we're going to explain why, and in the next episode, we're going to share some strategies for how staying small can be a smart business strategy. And to help us out, I've invited Paul Jarvis. Paul is a writer, an entrepreneur, a podcaster, a designer, an online course teacher, and he's the author of the brand new book, Company of One: Why Staying Small is the Next Big Thing in Business. Thanks for coming on the show, Paul.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. So I know that you began your career as a designer, and I'm sure there are people in our audience who have a craft or a skill like designing, coding, marketing, and so on. So let's start by talking about why you decided to go from being a designer to starting a business.
Yeah, and I actually think it's a really good place for people to start is in services. I think services typically cost a lot less in terms of time and money to get started, right? So you can know how to design, you can just start offering that as a service. Whereas if you're building a product, you have to actually build the product first and then start trying to sell it to people. So I think I didn't do that intentionally either. I can't take credit for being smart there. I just started as a designer and found out, and this was in the 90s or so. So I've been working for myself for quite some time. And I really just realized probably about 14, 15 years into it that I just wanted a change. I just wanted to try something different. I'd been designing websites for so long, and obviously the internet has changed a lot since the 90s, but it still was building websites for clients was my day-to-day life. And I wanted something different. And so the decision was really just to go slow, to see what I could do. And so I'll tell you the story, the first product that I made, which was a book. And at the time, I always run these weird life experiments for myself. And at the time, my wife and I were trying a buy nothing for a year experiment just for fun, because you do that for fun, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
And so I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write a cookbook. None of our plates and cutlery are phenomenal looking. They're not really that great. And I didn't have any camera gear. So I ended up trading everybody. So I had a friend that worked at a 5-star restaurant as a pastry chef. So I got to borrow all of the stuff from him. I had an editor that needed a website. So she edited my book and I made her a website. I traded my photographer all of the food so she could eat all of the food that she helped photograph. So I basically launched my first product for $0 because I didn't want to spend any money on it. And I also wanted to keep my income separate. So I was making money as a designer, but I wanted to see if I wanted to go the product route, and the book was the first thing, but then there was many more, and we can talk about this. I wanted to see if I could build my revenue up to more than I was making as a designer by working less hours. Because if I was making more but working more, it wouldn't like
Oh
it
yeah.
wouldn't really kind of balance out. So that's kind of how I started, was just I wanted to move slowly. I basically, it's funny because I worked for myself, but products were my side hustle
Hmm.
for about 2.5 years. So I was making books and then courses and then software evenings and weekends in the beginning, because
Hmm.
I still had a full-time job. Even though I was working for myself, I had a full-time job doing the client work, and actually had to push a bunch of things in the product space back because I had things like launches for clients. And when the clients were paying the majority of the money, they had to take priority. So I had to put my products on the back seat until they started to kind of equal, and then like go far past. So that's kind of where it started, was that.
Yeah.
Such a weird place to start, but that's where it started for me.
No, I think it makes sense. And I think it's awesome when people start with services. Like you said, you can immediately see an income stream. You're not stuck having to wait a long time to build and test out a product because you know what the service is. And like you said, since you have a craft, it makes sense for that to naturally be a service. So yeah, that's definitely a lot of the advice I give as well to first-time entrepreneurs who just don't have like a pile of cash sitting where they can take a year off or 6 months off to go off and build a product. It's like start with services and then you can make the transition. I'm also curious to know if any of the services ended up influencing the products that you have built.
Definitely. So sticking with the books for one more second, the
Mhm.
second book that I wrote was, I noticed that there was a lot of, especially in web designers like to write for other web designers, which is cool. But I was like, other web designers aren't paying me money. Other web designers aren't
Yeah.
hiring. So I wrote a book for people, for businesses that were hiring web designers to get the most out of their web projects. So that definitely influenced me. The other thing that really helped me was around the end of my web design career, I was working with a lot of clients who were really well known in their
Mhm.
industries and in their niches. And they really helped. And I didn't even ask them for this. They were just good people. So one, I learned a ton from them about how to run a business. And two,
Yeah.
they were kind of my biggest vocal supporters for the products that I was releasing. They still are. Like a
Cool.
bunch of the clients that I've worked with still, like they subscribe to a couple of the SaaSes that I have. They bought on
Mhm.
my books. So they were really vocal about the products I was making to their own audiences, because I had spent so much time when I was in client services really fostering relationships and really fostering like long-term things. And like
Mhm.
some of the clients that I worked with for 10, 12 years.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's impressive.
And so it was actually a little disappointing when I stopped doing web design full time, because I really liked working with all the clients that I had. And I was like, oh, this is a little sad. Like this is the end of a chapter for me. But I actually still keep in touch with a lot of them. I actually had a phone call last week with one of my,
Mhm.
who has also written a book, and she was kind of giving me advice on like launching a book and stuff. So like we still actually keep in touch.
That's awesome. And so, what did that transition look like for you when you decided, okay, I'm not going to be doing the design work, I'm not going to be offering the service, and I'm going to now devote 100% into products and product creation?
Yeah, I mean, it was, again, like it was, it's kind of a theme, but like I really like to move slowly.
Mhm.
So in the beginning, I just focused on writing like a book at a time, and then
Mhm.
I focused on building a course at a time, because it went basically courses, book, software for me. And in the core, even so, basically with everything that I've done, I've really leaned on, I call myself a lazy writer, but it's not really, it sounds cool and it's kind of true, but like I don't, it's easier for me to do the work if I know the work that I'm doing. So
Mhm.
all of the books that I've written have been based on people asking me the same questions and me being like, I could be lazier if I just write this one time, and every
Yep.
time somebody asks a question in the future, I can share the book instead of writing like a 3-page email. So
Totally. Yeah, I agree. I think I am also a lazy writer because I take a very similar approach with
there,
my books.
yeah,
Yeah.
same with courses. I would notice trends in my inbox with people, because I've written a weekly newsletter for 6 years called the Sunday Dispatches. I get a lot of feedback from that, and that's great. But it also shows me what people are interested in, what
Mhm.
people are struggling with, and what people are kind of looking to me for. So basically every single product I've ever built, from books to courses to software, have all been based on me listening to the audience that I engage with on a regular basis.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I believe I've been on your Sunday dispatches for a few years now, so I certainly love them and learn a lot from them. And that's kind of how I got you on the show, right? Was reaching out to you from after I got one of your Sunday dispatches announcing your book.
Yeah, and I mean I feel like a lot of creators kind of dismiss the content creation part, because a lot of it is just like, we need to do like content marketing and have these keywords and stuff. And I'm just like, I just want to communicate with my audience. Like, if people are interested to hear from me, that feels like such an honor to me.
Totally.
Like, I want to talk to them, engage with them. I want to see what they're doing.
Yeah.
And what I want too is that all the people on my list are interesting. Like, whenever I get emails from people, I'm like, that person's doing like such interesting work. And if I talk to them more, I get more things out of them than they even get from my list in terms of things that I learned. So yeah, that aspect has been great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So I want to dive a little bit into the topic at hand and define some terms for our conversation, right? Let's kind of transition and talk about, what do you mean by a big business?
Yeah, so I think a big business for me is kind of any business that isn't going to challenge the idea that growth should be questioned. Right? So any business that basically assumes the thesis that success equals growth. So the more you succeed, the more you grow. And I mean, it could be I think a big business to me would probably be, like, even just in terms of people, would probably be more than a couple dozen if they're kind of assuming that growth mindset, because in that case, they may technically be considered a smaller business, but if they had the means, they would be much bigger. Yeah. And that's kind of the track that they're on. That's the end game that they're playing. So to me, that's kind of how I would define it, which is different than how I think a lot of people would define it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And what about a company of one?
Yeah, so I think it's a really great name for a book. I think it's captivating.
Yeah.
I also think it's a bit of a slight misnomer, because I don't literally mean a one-person business. So my business isn't even a one-person business. I don't have employees, but I have so many freelancers that I work with. I have partners in most of the products that I do. Like, I have a small team of people that make my business run. So it doesn't necessarily mean a single-person business literally. It just means the idea that just as a big business is a business that doesn't question growth, a company of one is a business that questions growth. And a company of one is a business that doesn't assume that success equals growth. They think that success equals freedom. So the freedom to be able to choose whether or not you grow or not. Because sometimes growth makes a ton of sense. Sometimes it kind of doesn't. So I think the point is not to say that growth is bad and the reason why I wrote the book wasn't to say that. It was more to say that, what if we just question it just a little bit? What if we just have a few questions about what growth could mean and what the implications of growth are?
Yeah, totally. So I know at some point you started this questioning process and you made a conscious decision that you did not want to build a big business. Walk us through kind of why you made this decision and what it looked like for you personally.
Yeah, so and it's been a different answer for different parts of my career, right? So in the beginning, when I was doing web design, I didn't want to grow my business because I didn't want to promote myself out of the work that I like. And what I mean by that is I didn't want to, because I had a client list and a full roster of clients at all times, and I was booking months in advance, and people were always like, why don't you just make an agency, Paul? Like, you have enough clients, there's enough work, and like, you charge enough that you could just have an agency. And I'm like, well, if I do that, then I'm going to spend more time managing the designers and the developers and the people dealing with clients. And I'm not going to be able to do the work I love, which is the designing, the developing, and the with clients. So I'm like, I don't want to promote myself out of the work that I love. And I think in the corporate world, it's the same thing. I think that a lot of companies reward their best employees by putting them in positions of managing people. Which for some people, that makes I know some people who, like, they were put on this planet to manage people, and they're absolute bosses at that. I'm awful at that. Like, I can't even manage people doing small tasks. Like, when I'm cooking dinner and my wife is like, can I help with something? I'm like, yes, but I don't know what that would be. Like, it's just, I don't really manage people well. It's not even a skill that I want to like foster in myself there. So I think for that reason, when I was doing the service side of things, that made a lot of sense. And then in products, again, I don't want to have to manage people, but I also want a simple, like, I also like having a simple business that's easy to run, doesn't take too many people or resources or expenses to run, and can just serve the audience that it serves really well without having to focus on acquisition over retention. And getting to the actual question, the catalyst for all of this, I'd always been operating like this, but it wasn't until something happened where I was like, okay, now I'm consciously aware of why I'm doing it and what the implications of that are. So I used to live in a small surf town. My wife and I escaped downtown Vancouver to move to the middle of nowhere and surf all the time. So I was out surfing one day with my buddy who is a South African accountant, but he's a freelancer. And it was like September or August. And he was like, hey, and we're sitting out in the lineup, like waiting for waves. He's like, hey, dude, I've made enough money for the year. So I'm going to take off, like, I'll see you in January because I'm going to take off rock climbing and surfing down the coast for a couple months. And then he takes off on a wave and I'm like, he's made enough?
Yeah.
My mind is just blown, and he takes off on a wave and I'm just sitting there in the lineup, like bobbing up and down in the ocean. And then he paddled back around and then we started to talk about it. And he's like, I don't need more than I need. Like, I have enough in savings. Like, he's good with money. He's an accountant. He has enough in savings. He's got his mortgage and car and everything else paid for. He's got his trips saved up for. He's like, if I made more money, then I would have more responsibility and I would have more things in my business that I would have to do. And I wouldn't be as happy. So he's like, I found what enough revenue was for myself that kind of optimizes for my own enjoyment of the work and my own enjoyment of life outside of work. And I was like, that's what I do. But that sums it up way better than I had ever summed it up. And then after that happened, I was like, okay, this is how I've been operating, but I haven't really thought about how I've been operating like that. And this really was the catalyst for making me start to think about it and then start to write about it and then gain enough interest from people to be like, okay, this should probably be a book. There's other people interested in this.
Yeah. And I remember when I was reading your book, I actually was thinking of that scenario as well. And my experience recently, because I had a very similar thing where I had to come to this realization that, like, there is an enough moment, or there isn't enough amount. And for myself, the summer was the first summer since I started working like 14 years ago that I took off for maternity, and I didn't have any revenue coming in. And I had to be comfortable because I was a business owner and a founder. And so I was like, you know what? In May, I was like, I have enough. I'm going to be good. I don't need to worry. And I will get to August, September, and I will hopefully have enough revenue that will start generating again. Or if not, I'm good for the year. So come what may, I am not as worried. So yeah, I think it's wonderful when you have those conversations with yourself to realize enough is actually enough, and what that number is for you and what that looks like in terms of freedom.
Yeah, because if we don't question that, we just keep going.
Totally. Yeah. And sometimes it's not, like for myself, I couldn't keep going, like physically. So I think you have to kind of understand your constraints. So I think that's great that you had that realization while you were surfing, but I'm sure you still had some concerns. So maybe you can walk us through what they were.
Yeah. Working for yourself is tough.
Yeah.
There's no other kind of way around it. It's like, business is hard and business is difficult, and so much of it is out of our control. Like, we can have like the best market research and customer data, and still, like, when we put something out into the market, it's kind of out of our, like, once we launch, it's kind of out of our control. Like, we can get as many ducks in a row as possible, but it's still work to move the needle in any way whatsoever.
Totally.
And there's kind of no way to do it right. Like, if you use a blueprint for business, then everybody would just do business the exact same way because it was a proven way, right? Like, there's no one way to do it. So if you work for yourself, it's up to you to kind of say, like, I can define success for me.
Yeah.
I can define what enough is for me. And I mean, it always really comes back to what I want my life to look like and what I want my work to look like on a daily basis. And if my work can support that, then even if I have concerns or fears or whatever, it's still okay, because like I still work, like I make enough to be pretty stable right now, but it's
Mhm.
still like in the back of my head, it's still like that, the thinking back to like when I was 20, where it's like, well, what if I don't, like, what if ever, and I think it's a common fear for a lot of people. It's like, what if all the clients like go away? What if all the
Right.
customers like churn out next month? What if my churn rate is like 1 or 2%, but next month it's like 90%? Then it's still like, I don't think those, at least for me, I don't think those fears go away, but I think that I can kind of push against those fears and be like, that's probably not going to happen. And if I set things up as best as I can, where I'm doing the work that I like, I'm kind of building a life that I want, then even if everything goes to hell, I'll try again. Like I've had so many business failures at this point. It's like, on to the next one, push this
Yeah,
on to the next one kind of thing.
totally.
Yeah.
And I hear what you're saying. And I know that even though we feel like, okay, we have enough and we will bounce back, there's always people around us who are concerned, right? It could be family, friends, even some of our ex-coworkers or colleagues. So how do you respond to these folks to let them know, you know what, things are going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, there's just this weird societal thing, and I've actually seen it change a lot. Like when
Yeah.
I first started telling people that I work for myself in the 90s, they were like, no, but what
You're
do you
unemployed, right?
do? On the couch and what? Like Netflix didn't even exist,
Yeah.
or there's like DVDs. Like you just watch TV. Like no, I actually get a lot of work done. And nowadays it's a bit more accepted, but I
Mhm.
think it's still the case, and that's kind of why I wrote the book, is that people seem to respect people's work a lot more when it is like, if I go to say a dinner party and say like, oh, I work for myself and like I have like a home office, it's awesome. Look, like
Yeah, totally. I agree.
it's still a home office, versus me saying like, well, I have a business and it has like 150 employees and we're hiring 20 employees a month. Like
Right.
that sounds more impressive, but I don't think it should. Like I know a lot of people that have businesses like that where they're really unhappy,
Hmm.
and I've kind of built the life that I want without having to do that. So I think, yeah, again, it comes back to defining success. Like I also wouldn't want to be at a dinner party where I'm going to be judged harshly.
That's true. Yeah.
Like I'd rather just go to a fun dinner party where we don't have to talk about work.
Yeah,
That's
totally.
what.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Yeah.
like, and even people like my parents or even my grandparents that don't really like, that's not the way business used to work,
Hmm.
but it is now.
Right.
And it's like, I think as well, because I've been doing it for so long, like the fears that they had in the beginning of me, like not getting a great job at a corporation and like going up the corporate ladder and stuff, they see that I do fine. They see that I've got a great life. They see that I'm happy. So it's not that big of a deal. Like I think a lot of times proving people wrong is just like living a good life.
Yeah. It's
And like just I
sad
make
reality. Yeah.
every year. Yeah.
Yeah, I know for myself at my second startup, when I started it, the first one my dad was like super skeptical of, and then the second one he was like, yeah, yeah, that totally makes sense. And he was just, there was no question about why I was doing this. But the first one was like, I can't believe you're doing this. Like, you're so young, you're throwing away your whole career. Like, who will hire you again? So I think they eventually get it. And like you said, sometimes they need to see some indicators around you, whether it's you're able to make rent, you're not living, in their basement or on their couch, and a number of other factors. And then they're like, okay, they're okay. We'll back off now. So yeah, it's kind of funny how that transition happens.
Yeah, work changes all the
Yeah.
time. Like, who knows what work is going to look like in 10 years?
Oh yeah, totally.
There's
Yeah.
probably
So
guessing, but
yeah, yeah, I agree. I think that's actually one of the first myths that I wanted to tackle, which is around this whole notion of like building a company, right? Do you need to continue to grow every year? Your staff have that impressive 150 employees and all these customers and revenues, because if you don't, then you're, like you said, you're seen as a failure. But the chances are that if you don't build that big company, some big competitor may swoop in, steal all your customers, steal kind of your business ideas. So let's start by debunking this myth.
Yeah, so I think, like we kind of talked about in the beginning, I don't think growth is bad.
Mhm.
I think that unquestioned growth can be bad. And I think we kind of touched on it, we kind of hinted at it a bit, but the idea of enough, and I think we kind of can break that into two camps for our work. And that really leads us to the answer of, does it make sense for my business to grow now, or does it not? And so I think, so one, enough is different for everybody. So I don't have any kids. It's just my wife and I and our pet rats. And I share a room with my pet rat. Right? Like this office is his as much as it's mine. But like, I don't have as many expenses because I don't have, like one of my friends, he has 4 kids. So he has a lot more expenses than me. I can't imagine what his college bill is going to look like.
Yeah. I don't want to imagine his college bill. Yeah, either.
So like, it's different for everybody. And like, I live in the woods in the middle of nowhere, which is a lot different than when I lived in a city, or like paying rent in New York or San Francisco is a lot higher than living like in the woods on an island in Canada. So I think enough is different for everybody. Same with the business.
Mhm.
So some businesses have more expenses than others just by the nature of their business. If you have to pay like rent at a brick and mortar location, that's an expense that maybe a tech company that can be built remotely doesn't have. So I think we can kind of break enough into two camps, because I think this is important for figuring out and debunking growth always being good. And so pre-enough is where we all start. And it's not a bad thing to be in the pre-enough phase. It just means that you haven't reached enough to make your business sustainable. Typically that's profit, because if a business is profitable, it's almost always going to be sustainable. If it keeps bringing in money, you're going to be able to keep it going. That's just the way that business works. So in pre-enough, you need to work towards having enough to make your business make sense. And it's hard to have that instantly. Like it's really hard to have just, I'm going to snap my fingers and have enough customers and like my MRR is high enough to be good to go right away. And so typically in pre-enough, you need to work a bit harder. You need to like hustle a bit. I don't even like the word hustle, but you need to work a bunch.
Maybe moonlighting. Yeah, exactly.
You need to work at growth, right? So pre-enough, you need to work at growth to get to making your business sustainable. And maybe that means hiring a couple people to make the business work. I don't know everybody's business. So it depends on the business.
Mhm.
But I think where the debunking comes in is that not very many people question whether or not they've hit enough ever.
Yeah.
And I think when we're and since we all start out in the same place, we all start out needing this growth to survive. And then we just keep going with it. And it just keeps turning into that like upwards chart. And where I think the whole point of Company of One, the whole point of the book is that there can be a questioning of whether or not I've reached enough, because the second camp of enough is post enough. And that's where we can say like, okay, maybe growth doesn't make sense at this moment. Maybe growth doesn't make sense for my existing customers. If I'm focusing more on acquisition than retention, my business is probably going to bleed pretty hard in that.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. And that's actually the second myth that I wanted to debunk, right? Is in order to scale, you need all of this infrastructure. You need all of these either customers, or you need all these employees so that you can continue to grow.
Yeah, I think it takes money to make money.
Yeah.
That's kind of the thing. And I kind of question that as well, right? Because I think that there's always a cost to that. There's always a cost in terms, like you're saying, like there's always a cost in infrastructure. There's always a maintenance cost. And I think that a lot of times people in business don't question the cost of opportunities. Right? They don't question what is going to happen if, say, I take on this big client, or I add an enterprise plan to my SaaS, or something that's going to require, like, if it's a white glove service, there needs to be somebody somewhere like wearing those white gloves to do the extra support or the extra onboarding. And I think that infrastructure can be used, but it has to be questioned first. And a lot of times we can kind of question whether or not adding that infrastructure makes sense, or adding those expenses makes sense. by thinking about, one, do we need this thing? Do our customers need this thing? Is this the audience we really want to go after? And there's a lot of businesses that do really well not trying to hit like enterprise customers, for example. Or even a great example of this is actually Basecamp. Basecamp has one plan.
Yeah.
You can only buy, I think it's $99. It changes all the time, but I think it's $99 right now, because they don't want to have clients who are paying more and therefore more important.
Right.
They want all their clients to be the same importance, because there's no physical way to pay them more, right? And I think that that kind of makes sense. And the other thing that you can do with infrastructure is, we live in a pretty awesome digital age right now where we can automate things.
Right.
Like, I can run a business that like 96% of my revenue is generated from email and email automations. And that's just me writing, and it shows up in the same place. And it takes the same amount of effort to write just you an email as it takes to write 30, 40,000 people an email. So that's one good example. Another good example is on the support end of things, like building a knowledge base that you can kind of punt customers to before human support, where if you pay attention to the questions people are asking, you can eventually notice patterns, because people are always I've done so much support for all of my businesses. I think everybody should have to do that, because you really get to know what people need. And you see patterns. And you can be like, I can make a video for this. It's just like being a lazy writer. Lazy support person, by just creating like knowledge-based documents, videos, walkthroughs, better onboarding. Like, the more that I've improved my onboarding, I've reduced the support for all of the things that I have by like exponential levels, just because I've tweaked so many different onboarding processes in the businesses that I have, that every time somebody has a question, I know that they're going to ask that question before they do, and I answer it before they have to email support.
Yeah, it's almost like magic to them, right? Because they're like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that you read my mind, but you've just seen it so many times that it's totally natural for you.
But that saves on infrastructure. It saves on having to hire a team of people.
Yeah. Now, I know in the next episode, you're going to dive into more detail around infrastructure, but thank you for giving us that brief preview. My next myth that I want to dive into is this whole idea of being a leader in a company. And, there's just a lot of leaders who think that no matter what, they cannot fail. So walk us through, this whole mentality of why you can't fail and why this ends up being a bad practice.
Yeah, I think a lot of it, it's so funny, because like, there's a chapter in the book about this as well. I almost wanted to call it like, leaders are people too. I can't remember. I think it was like the myth of the infallible leader or something like that. Instead, I think leaders are people too is better. But I think there's this Hollywood start. It's so funny that Hollywood's got its teeth into like startup culture.
Yeah.
Like churning out content around startups. And it's like almost all like, this too. And it's like mostly wrong. That's not how things actually work. But there's this myth that like the leader is like this A-type, charismatic, dominant, mostly white guys. Like, and it's just not the case. And I mean, like, for a lot of the company, it's funny because like there's a CNN piece. I can't remember the reporter's name who did it, but she interviewed heavily Rand Fishkin, who used to run now runs SparkToro, and talking to him about leadership, and he got into like talking about depression and stuff. I was just like so moved by this. It's like such a great piece, so moved by that. And I started to think about it. I'm like, a lot of the people that I know that do well in running a business where they're in a leadership position or like a founder leader position, they're kind of not like what we see on TV, or they're kind of not like the news stories about like the Elon Musks or like the Steve Jobs when he was alive. And I think that this is promising for people, because like, I'm not an A-type, like macho charismatic person. Like, I'm a nerdy introvert, right? And I'm super quiet. Like the majority of time, especially in groups of people, I'm super quiet. And the more that I kind of looked into this whole thing, I found that it's so completely wrong. And I just kept finding study after study. There's a study done by Harvard Business that found that introverted leaders, especially when they're managing skilled and proactive teams, can be very highly successful, because the leader's job is really to just be quiet and calm and listen, pay attention, and then make decisions based on that. instead of just making decisions like this is, I'm the ruler here.
Right.
I'm going to make all of the decisions. And I think the other thing is that there's a lot of like depression and like mental instability in people, especially in tech,
Mm-hmm.
because they feel like they can't let their flaws happen or shine through, or they can't let anybody be aware of their flaws, because like they think that their investors will leave or that their employees will leave. And I think
Right.
everybody is human, right? Like I started, like everybody's human, everybody's imperfect. And I think that just like anybody can make mistakes, leaders can make mistakes. And I think as leaders, it's kind of our job to just be more self-aware and to check in with ourselves. Because it's silly to assume that like one person can take on all the responsibility
Oh,
of
yeah.
the company.
Yeah.
Like it would be hard. And like I'm adverse to stress. Like I want
Yeah.
as stress as possible. So like I don't care if my flaws kind of shine through. Because one, I think that if people see my flaws, they have flaws too. I'm just going to be more relatable. Like if I'm just honest and own the mistakes that I make and the problems that I have, it's everybody, right? Like
Yeah.
I think that just makes me more human. That makes me better at being a leader versus like pretending that I'm perfect. Like I
Totally.
don't know.
Yeah. And I mean, to be fair, I think a lot of the smarter investors or the smarter partners, the people that you ultimately want to work with, they're going to see through that. You know, if you are pretending or if you make it seem like you have no flaws or you got this when you really don't, right? I think it's a lot better when you can find those who value that honesty and are okay with you saying, hey, these are my limitations, or here's like why we're going to not be successful at hitting a milestone, or here's how we kind of screwed up. I think they end up being better partners longer term as a result.
Yeah. And I mean, it just leads to such like, if people can't feel confident
Yeah.
in being able to share when mistakes happen, you're not going to know about them. And that's way worse.
Oh yeah, totally. Yes.
It's okay that you've made mistakes, and other people or employees or the people you work with are going to be like, okay, it's okay if I have mistakes, because mistakes are going to happen.
Yeah.
Right? So, and it's better if you, as a leader, it's better if you know about them.
Totally. Yep. Yeah. I know a lot of the founders I coach, they're like, should I be honest here? It's like, well, if you're not, I'm probably going to find out anyways. So you might as well tell me now and like, let's establish some trust versus me having to like find out and then help you work through and fight the fires later on, right? It's better to kind of put the smaller ones out now than have it escalate and get worse. So yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So let's switch gears now and talk about why somebody may even want to consider building a company of one.
Yeah, so there's a few reasons why I think that smaller can be better in a business. And like I said, like this isn't for everybody. Like I'm not saying everybody should just have a little business. I'm just saying that it's good to think about these things. And even I think it's also good to think about these things when you're working with other people. And like when I partner with people to make new companies, I always have this discussion with people. Like I always say, like, what's your vision for this? Like, if this business does well, like if it's the best case scenario, like what do you want? Because if we don't talk about these things and question these things, your co-founder could be like, I want to have a massive business like the size of Google or Facebook.
Right.
I want it to be 3 people. It's like, it's kind of cool to have that conversation. So a few things that I think we might want to consider when building a company of one. So the first thing is that resilience. It's easier to be resilient when you're a smaller business than when you're a larger business, because larger businesses need more resources, more people, typically more capital. So if I'm running a business for myself, like out of my home where my expenses are almost nothing, I don't need that much profit to be sustainable long term. Like the number I need to reach is so low compared to a huge company that probably needs millions of dollars a day just to like stay afloat. So you can be more resilient if you're a smaller company. The second one, and this is a huge one for me, is control. It's really hard to have control in a large company because there's so many people, there's so many like project owners, there's so many moving parts. You have to appease like investors and boards of directors and stuff. If I want to change directions with my company, I'm just like, does this make sense to me? Like, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't. And the decision is made. So I ultimately have a lot more control in my business. I don't think any business has ultimate control. I think customers and markets kind of dictate that a little bit, but
Yeah.
I at least have the option to steer the ship when it makes sense. Even though I can't go against the current, I can still be like going down the river and like, oh, I'm going to avoid that rock, or I'm going to go down this way instead of this way. The third thing is speed. So, and I don't just mean like working quickly or frantically. I just mean I've worked like, I've done projects with Fortune 100 companies when I was doing design work. And if I had to just get approval for like, is this blue button acceptable? Yes or no? We have to have a stakeholder meeting. That stakeholder meeting needs another stakeholder meeting. And it's like 4 weeks later, I'm like, yes, you can proceed to the next stage with that button that's blue, but we may change our minds. And like, I can move so much faster. Like I can build, a good example of this is I'm currently building a publishing platform that's kind of like Medium, but different. And it's taking me and another person 2 months to basically build the same platform as Medium. And it's like 2 people. So like I can move so fast because it's just me and possibly 1 or 2 other stakeholders, and that's it. And like, if we need to make decisions, it's just like in Twist, which is like Slack, but better. Yeah. Sorry for the dig on Slack.
It's okay. They're not a sponsor, so it's cool. Yeah.
The notifications get a bit much, but like I can just be in the chat on Twist and be like, "Is this a good idea?" And I'll get like 2 thumbs up. I'm like, "Good to go." Both people signed off. Fourth thing is simplicity, and I think that typically companies grow by adding complexities, which are harder. Like they add more features or more products or more anything.
Process, yeah.
Then it just gets more complicated, and it's harder to change one thing. And then that goes back to speed, where if you do, then everything grinds to a halt.
Right.
So I think when you're small, you can maintain a focus and be pretty ruthless with that focus. And ultimately, if you keep things simple, it's easier just to, because business, we already talked about this, business is hard.
Yeah.
So if you can keep things simple, that's just one thing off your plate. And the 5th thing is durability. And this is big for me because I think that it's funny because like, if you think about it, like size is associated with success. Success is associated with hubris, and hubris is the beginning of the end of success. This is like this weird circle, right? And I think instead, smaller can last longer. Like in all the examples in the book, I found, did you know that the standard amount of time a business stays open on the S&P index is 15 years?
Oh, I didn't know that. No, I know some of the other businesses that have been around for like hundreds of years that are, Fortune 100 and 500, but I didn't know that one.
Yeah, the majority of them last about 15 years. I'm like, I've had a company for 20 years.
Nice.
Like, I'm already 5 years past that. It's just easier, like we talked about earlier, if you have less expenses, less moving parts, you can move fast, you can control things, you can be resilient, then you can last a lot longer in business. And I mean, it ultimately depends on your goals. If your goal is to sell your business, people don't want to buy a business that's one person for a lot of money, regardless of how well it does. That's just
they kind of did it with a couple. I know Instagram was kind of small, so they've done it before, yeah.
But not as many. Like there's definitely some great examples of that.
Yeah.
Typically, they want to see like butts in chairs before they buy a business. And so, if that's your goal, if your goal is to exit, then it makes sense to grow because you're going to have you'll be more likely to be able to sell for more money if you're a bit bigger.
Totally.
You just want your business to keep going and supporting you and your family. Yeah. Maybe not as big.
Yep. Comes back to your own personal goals. Yeah. So I know the final myth that I wanted to debunk, and we've already touched on this a lot, is why bigger doesn't necessarily mean that you're innovating, and that it can often get in the way of innovation. I know you've already touched upon that with some of the things that you talked about in terms of speed, simplicity, and durability. Is there anything else you could think of as to why bigger doesn't necessarily mean that you need to, you're innovative and that smaller can actually be more helpful?
Yeah, I think like anybody that's worked at a big company and had a new idea
Mhm.
and it just goes nowhere because
Yeah,
there's no, like companies tend to grow because they're great innovators. And then when they grow, they stop being able to be great innovators. And it's sad, right? Like it so many times companies get to the size that they are because they've been able to innovate and make things and move quickly and all of those things all 5 points that I discussed.
right.
But then once they get big, unless they kind of work on small autonomous teams, like
Mhm.
there are ways in a big company to operate as a company of one within a big company, I mean, I think that really can lead to innovation in a big company where they can have a ton of autonomy and they can work on things and maybe they have like some R&D time that they
Right.
spend. But a lot of companies like outside of tech, that just doesn't exist. Like you're at that business to do your job.
Yeah.
And if you have an idea,
Somewhere else. Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Go start your own business and then
Right.
grow big and then you can't have more ideas.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for helping me debunk a number of these myths around the company of one, or rather the big businesses that are out there versus a company of one.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you very much, Purnima. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this episode of Build. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to receive the next episode, where Paul is going to share some of the best practices around building a company of one. Ciao for now. Build is brought to you by amazing patrons. Our platinum patrons are Andrea Goulet, CEO and co-founder of Corgi Bites; Charbel Saman, founder of Sprintwell; Dee Gill, founder of Chime On; Jamie Hand; and Lauren Hassan, CEO and founder of Developer, as well as the following patrons. If you'd like to join them and support Build, please visit patreon.com/build. In exchange for your support, you'll receive perks like advanced copies of our books from authors highlighted on the show, special pricing on upcoming Femgineer courses, and more. Welcome to Femgineer's Confident Communicator course introductory video series. I'm Purnima Vijay Shankar, the founder of Femgineer.
And I'm Karen Catlin, a former tech executive who's now an advocate for women who are working in the tech industry.
For the last 22 years, I have been speaking in public, and for the last 8 within the tech industry. I have given a TEDx talk, I've been a guest lecturer at Duke's Pratt School of Engineering, an entrepreneur in residence at 500 Startups, a mentor in residence at Techstars, and was the founding engineer of Mint.com.
I am on my second career. In my first career, I spent 25 years building software products. I started out as a software engineer and over time moved to the executive level, where I was a vice president at Adobe Systems. Now, in my second career, I'm an advocate for women, which means I do a lot of public speaking about diversity, about women's leadership topics, and I've given a TEDx talk.
The Confident Communicator course is a live online course that Karen and I co-teach together. In this video series, we're going to give you a sense of what the Confident Communicator course is and what you'll get out of it.
You'll learn about the challenges Purnima and I have faced learning the craft of public speaking ourselves. You'll learn why we decided we just couldn't keep all of this knowledge to ourselves, and you'll hear from students who have taken the class about how they have become more confident communicators. You're going to get a behind-the-scenes look at the entire course. You'll meet some past students and see how they went from being shy and nervous to poised and confident communicators. You're also going to meet employers and sponsors who found the course valuable enough to invest in and send their people. And finally, you'll get some sample lessons so you know the material that we're going to be covering. Sign up below to receive the first lesson immediately, where you'll understand why it's not good enough to just be heads down. You need to speak up to get the recognition you deserve. Ciao for now.